It's called reading. Top to bottom, left to right. Group words together as a sentence. Take Tylenol for any headaches. Midol for any cramps.
Books are some of the most uniform, commonplace, and standard things in our lives. We read them for fun, for school, for work. They entertain us, they teach us, and they help us. Books have been doing this not just for hundreds of years, but for millennia. We like to think of some things as static and eternal, but that really isn't the case. Things haven't always been this way.
I'm Daniel Seehausen, and this is the Answer Archive.
Today, obviously, we think of books as fixed, finished, bound.
That's Dr. David Davis. He's a professor whose research focus is on early printing.
But early printed books were very rarely sold as bound objects. So you would buy a volume of loose leaf pages, and then you would go to the bookbinder, who oftentimes was at the same bookstall or next door, and he would put on whatever binding that you would want.
Sometimes volumes were never bound. The codex, as in the book we're used to, a series of pages, a cover, a binding, it wasn't sacred in the way that it is today. This means that books were sometimes treated in ways that would grossly offend us.
They would, from our perspective, abuse their books, tearing pages out, removing images if they didn't like the images, or if they really liked the image, they may take it out and put it somewhere else.
This different attitude towards books would cause some things that we think unthinkable to happen. For example, in the 13th century, a group of monks wrote over the famous mathematician Archimedes' book, The Method of Mechanical Theorems, and unfortunately, unbeknownst to them, it was the only copy left. In the late 2000s, scientists were able to piece back together what had been lost, and in it, Archimedes laid out the basics of calculus, 2 millennia before Newton and Leibniz started squabbling over which of them had invented it.
Before Gutenberg and the movable type printing, most of the production of manuscripts would have been done in scriptoriums, usually housed in monasteries.
In other words, every single word of every book had to be handwritten by a monk. This, plus the cost of paper being exponentially higher than it is today, would sometimes lead to mistakes like what happened to Archimedes' book. Sometimes monks were wrong when they thought that the paper was more valuable than the words written on it. And of course, when every single word of every book has to be hand-copied, that makes books expensive. Then Gutenberg invents the printing press, and everything doesn't change.
There's not huge change initially. It's interesting. Technologically, we do this often. We model new technology and the way we produce new technology after oftentimes the old way we did the same thing. So initially, the printing press looked a lot like a scriptorium in a way. You know, you have a master and then many apprentices who are all organized around producing one particular text.
The most famous printer, Johannes Gutenberg, was the first printing press operator in Europe.
The early printers are sort of going out on a limb financially. It costs a great deal of money. First, you have to actually get a printing press somehow, either on loan or you pay for it with cash up front. And then you have to hope that all the money you put into the ink, the paper, the movable type is actually going to pay off. So you're going to produce 1,500 copies of the Bible. Well, let's hope that you sell half of them, because it's unlikely that you're going to make up your costs unless you sell more than 50 to 80% of them.
Unfortunately for Gutenberg, he fell into the latter category of people who couldn't pay back their debts. He couldn't make up his costs. Within just a few years of starting his printing press project, the man he borrowed money from, Fust, wanted it back. He thought Gutenberg was taking too long. He lost his workshop, his press, and his name wasn't on any of the Bibles that he had printed.
Gutenberg bottoms out. He has a bit of a row with his partners, and they go off. Peter Schoeffer basically becomes one of the most important printers at the end of the 15th century. Printing works like that of Cicero, more Bibles. Gutenberg dies about a decade later in a great amount of debt and is remembered for his invention, his accomplishment, but doesn't really sort of partake in this great invention that he's been a part of.
Perhaps there is a small happy note for Gutenberg, though. He may have died in relative obscurity, but his invention and his name went on to symbolize a revolution. This revolution drastically changed science, mathematics, religion, and every word you've ever read.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. As you may have noticed, this is the first of a two-part episode. The interviewee for this part was Dr. David Davis, and he was also my main source of information on the topic. If you want to see any of his works, they'll be below the episode. And if you liked the episode, please subscribe. And as always, I'm the writer and producer of this show, Daniel Seehausen, and my supervising producer has been Joshua Sikora. I hope to see you again for the next part, and thanks for watching.